Hello and welcome to GCSE Bitesize Art and Design. The aim of this programme is to help you through your art and design coursework and the final exam, and to raise your grade. First, there's an introduction to the programme and to the GCSE Art and Design course itself. The programme then looks at the 4 assessment objectives by which all your work will be judged for your Art and Design GCSE. The last section looks at preparing for the final Art and Design exam. You can go straight to any of the sections by using the clock counter in the corner. First, the introduction. In this section, we'll look at how to use this TV programme and give an outline of the GCSE course and the exam. First, the TV programme. It's best to watch this programme a bit at a time in bite-sized chunks. Relate what you see to the ideas you're working on yourself and use it alongside your own course notes. The programme will also give you a good idea of what the examiners are looking for and should give you more confidence as you work through your course. There's more information in the GCSE Bitesize book and on the Bitesize website at bbc.co.uk/revision. Throughout the programme, we'll be following 4 art and design students during their GCSE course, showing how they conceived, researched and built up their ideas into their final piece.
My name is Georgie and I've come to the Tate Modern today as I find the building and everything inside it endlessly fascinating. I hope to be inspired from my artwork, which is based on the theme overhead and underneath.
Georgie's final piece will be a 3D sculpture using everyday materials.
My name's Max. For this piece I was given the theme of everyday objects as a starting point, and over time it developed into a depiction of an everyday morning and the chaos associated with it. I have a passion for cinema and therefore wanted to make a short movie.
Max's final piece will be a fast-moving video about getting up in the morning.
My name is Rima. I have come to this mosque as I am interested in Islamic art and culture. I hope to use this in my final piece, for which the theme is overhead and underneath.
Rima will work towards a mixed media piece about the different generations of her family.
My name's Helen and I'm also studying the theme of overhead and underneath. I have a real passion for swimming and want to include it in my artwork.
Helen's will be a textile piece inspired by her love of swimming. Throughout the programme, we'll follow the progress of these students as they work towards their final piece. Let's now look briefly at the GCSE course and the exam. GCSE Art and Design involves having some knowledge of art as well as exercising art skills. It's a practical subject that also requires thought and research. The endorsed syllabus involves studying one specific aspect of art and design, such as photography, textiles, graphic design, 3D or fine art. The unendorsed syllabus allows you to study the whole range. This programme will be useful whichever syllabus you're doing. Art and design is very different from other GCSE subjects. The syllabus is open to personal interpretation and less structured than most subjects, but it's still hard work. What do these GCSE Art and Design students think of their subject?
Art is one of the hardest GCSEs because you have to prepare for it in advance, and then when you're going to do your final piece, you really need to know what you're doing, because you can't change your mind at the last minute. You need to have it prepared.
I like art more than most of my other subjects because you have a lot more freedom to do what you want to do rather than just sticking to the syllabus.
Art is a very good subject, especially if you're creative. It allows you to express yourself and be who you want to be, and also follow your identity, make developments and find out who you are.
Art is not content specific, so it's not laid down which artists, art movement or period you have to learn about, or which type of art, craft or design you work on. There are also many transferable skills you can use in art and design from your other school subjects. Your teachers are more involved than in other exam topics. They can give you useful advice and guidance during your course, and they also assess and mark your work for the exam board. Art and Design GCSE is in two parts, your coursework and a final exam, and you get marks for both. The coursework you do during your course counts for 60% of your marks and is assessed by your teacher. It's vital that you keep a record of every stage of your work in journals and sketchbooks because it all counts towards your final mark. The exam at the end of your course is worth 40% of your marks, and there's more about this final exam near the end of the programme. All your coursework and final exam work has to meet 4 interrelated assessment objectives. You can produce a good piece of work, but if you don't meet the assessment objectives, you'll be marked down. There's more about each of these assessment objectives coming up next. In this section, we'll look at the 4 all-important assessment objectives by which your coursework and final exam piece will be judged. The 4 assessment objectives are recording observations, experiences and ideas, analysing and evaluating artefacts, objects and images, developing and exploring ideas, and presenting your work and connecting it with the work of others. First, we'll look at recording observations, experiences and ideas. For this first assessment objective, we'll look at exploring themes, recording observations, doing primary research, doing secondary research, and what to do if you hit a blank wall. First, exploring your themes. For example, you could explore the theme of war by studying artists who worked during the 2 World Wars. This is Stanley Spencer's Travois Arriving with Wounded at a Dressing Station, painted during the First World War. And this is Paul Nash's Dead Sea, painted during the Second World War. And this is Turner Prize winner Grayson Perry's more recent interpretation.
This is X-92, or as my daughter calls it, the girl's aeroplane. A fighter jet is a symbol of male aggression, I suppose. My version has nice pretty things on it, like flowers and kittens. I've painted it in platinum luster, which could look like polished metal, and it's also like something out of a carnival. Instead of little crosses or bombing run markers, I've got little hearts. So it's a kind of love aeroplane, really. And on the wall, I like it because it looks a bit like a crucifix. The mixture of religion and war is something that fascinates me.
This is how our 4 GCSE Art and Design students began to explore their themes.
Often going to galleries to see other artists' work is very useful, as it can often give you new ideas and inspiration to take a new route or a different route to make your work more interesting.
Yeah, the atmosphere in a gallery, all the creative work that is in there inspires you to go home and create something of your own, and subliminally it can influence your work. I came here today to trigger my imagination, as the Tate Modern is a place where I'm able to think laterally and my ideas are able to flow, as it's a place where art has been stretched.
I'm a passionate swimmer and I swim every day, and so it's part of my lifestyle. To develop my ideas, I got a friend to come and take photos of me above water and underneath water while I was swimming. And we did it from a lot of different angles and using different strokes. After going swimming, I decided to explore some artists who had a thirst for water. I'm going to begin with David Hockney. I was initially drawn to David Hockney's work because of his theme of swimming pools. I wanted to link that to my underwater theme as well. Also, his use of pattern and technique make the water come alive in his pieces.
Rima's theme is also overhead and underneath.
Although I'm in a Turkish mosque, I feel it brings back great memories from India, as everywhere I look in India you see tiles such as these. These really help me to picture what it would have been like. My personal theme was actually about patterns. I felt that the patterns didn't actually fit with overhead and underneath, and so from patterns I developed into generations. These tiles are very beautiful because of the colour and the boldness that they have, although they combine the boldness with delicate designs. The patterns on the tiles remind me of the division of Pakistan and India, as when they were one, there used to be mosques scattered around both places. But now as they've divided, the patterns have stayed, but the Muslims have moved.
Georgie was inspired by artists using common materials. Arte povera, poor art.
As I started studying arte povera and their use of very everyday, mundane objects, I became very interested in that, and I started developing ideas from sketches. And after that, I decided to base my work within my own surroundings. The first place I looked for inspiration was above and underneath my bed.
Thematically, Sam Taylor Wood was influential just because the fruit is an everyday object, but I mean, also she's a very powerful artist, breaking the constraints of art and dabbling in a video medium which challenges the concept of where the line can be drawn, where what is art. Pop art often focuses on the everyday item, such as Warhol's Heinz boxes and his soup tins. Lichtenstein also commenting on consumer society. You can draw inspiration from anything, it doesn't even have to be art. Well, I first got my idea when I was having breakfast, and I was opening the cereal, pouring the milk, opening the orange juice, opening the fridge. Plugging in the kettle, turning the kettle on, putting the toast in, and it kind of dawned on me that all these switches and cogs, as well as looking visually interesting, were the sound they produced was also interesting. All were very influential in the initial ideas of my piece.
As you explore your theme, you need to start recording your observations. This is textile artist Karen Howes.
I make mixed media hangings, which consist of fabric sketches that are linked together with found materials, maybe stones or shells.
Established artists like Karen often use sketches and drawings as a way of getting started or to visualise ideas they have in their head.
Sketchbook to me is like a diary. I like to do on-the-spot sketches because they're an immediate response to the place. I wanted to use the watercolours because watercolours are quite good at getting this sort of watery effects. Photographs are like little glimpses of things that you've seen. They help jog my memory when I come to do the piece of work. I mean, I might take a whole view of the landscape, or sort of might focus in on a piece that's got really nice colours in it that you want to remember. So maybe a close-up of a crunchy texture of a dry stone herringbone pattern.
Our students used similar ways of recording their initial observations.
I use a lot of drawing in my artwork because it means that you can translate your ideas from your head onto paper and see how they look, and it helps you visualise what you have in your head. Also, you can draw objects and draw things from direct observation. If you see anything interesting, you don't have to rely on photographs or second-hand material, and so it's more flexible for you to develop it in the way that you want.
When I was in the mosque, I used sketches off the tiles. I really just looked at firstly pencil sketches. But I find sketching quite difficult and quite boring to do. And so I take photographs and recreate these when I get home using different colours, different medias and different shapes. This often helps throughout my work as it helps me to develop my ideas.
Remember, your initial first-hand observations, recorded as sketches, notes or photographs, will be an important part of your final presentation, as well as helping you with ideas for your final piece. After recording your initial observations, it's time for some primary research. Primary research involves looking at original source materials or your own surroundings and studying them at first hand. Studying the work and themes of other artists and the ideas, issues and emotions they express, or even visiting an established living artist. First, we'll look at using original source material. Rima went to areas of London that had sizable Asian communities to follow up her initial enthusiasm for Islamic patterns.
I feel I link with artists from the past on my own culture and tradition by using the same Islamic floral patterns. Can I get this one, please? I feel that being in the actual atmosphere helps to inspire the person and also to recreate the mood that you should be in to be able to work and create such personal pieces. I'm interested in textiles because I've been spending a lot of time with my grandmother back in India. She uses the traditional way of textiles, sewing, stitching and knitting. However, I feel that although I know these skills, I should be able to develop them in my own personal way and use them throughout my work to suit me.
Georgie's initial interest in her bed springs led her to look at other curly objects around the house.
So I started sketching like the telephone wire and the spring from a lamp. Every time you see a spring, you kind of you sketch it, just to almost broaden my practice with springs and just see how a different perspective or a different angle can alter the image. I never really imagined from the beginning that it'd ever lead on from the spring. I thought it was going to lead on to maybe the subconscious, maybe dreams as an overhead. But this one sketch I did under my bed, the spring really stood out, and I was interested in the linear patterns that it made. And so I started studying more other artists who had used linear spring-like patterns.
Primary research can also mean getting inspiration from your own surroundings. Ceramic artist Annie Turner is a case in point, taking inspiration from her surroundings and environment. She also carefully records what she sees.
The quality of the landscape changes with the light and the season. So photographs are a very useful way of recording time, and that's something that's very important in my work. It is a landscape of extreme contrasts. It changes from one minute to the next. It can be incredibly beautiful, and at the same time it can be extraordinarily bleak. The sky can actually blend into the water. There's almost no change of colour. In the winter, there's this sort of greyness about it. It's very powerful and very beautiful. The meander bowls came about because of the meanders that are in the creek, which are these wonderful curved marks in the mud where the tide comes in. Each bowl has a different landscape encapsulated within it, and they will all have different objects impressed into the surfaces. The colour is probably one of the things in my work which is quite objective. I'm trying to make it look like the quality and the colour of the mud, because it's just so fantastic.
Rima is looking around her own home, taking inspiration from her family photos to build on her ideas of heritage and generations.
My local surroundings inspired me. I basically looked at my house, really, somewhere which I've grown up with and in memories, because most of my work's quite on my heritage and my actual culture and tradition, and I thought what better place than actually where I've grown up and where I have that all surrounding me. Although my work was inspired by Islamic tiles and Turkish tiles, I also looked at the Gurdwara and the temple, because the patterns are also echoed there with delicate and intricate designs also used. And so I used that throughout my work because that was the image I was trying to go for, something delicate but still something that would make an impact.
And of course, Max took inspiration from his domestic surroundings for his video.
Prior to making this piece, I was taking photos of everyday objects around the house, so you can create a storyboard through that and through each photo. So preliminary photos are definitely useful.
At school, Max started to put some ideas down in a storyboard.
I strongly recommend a storyboard. One, because it helps you organise your ideas and thoughts, and also it's easier to add extra ideas in afterwards, and it creates a coherent story.
Another form of primary research is to study the work and themes of other artists as a source of inspiration for your own work.
To do some more detailed work on David Hockney's work, I went to the Royal Academy to see his lesser known works. This gave me a different perspective, another angle on his work, which meant that I'd gone deeper into research to look at his techniques.
Helen also examined the work of other artists.
These photographs are of swimming pools, which drew me to them. I thought they were of David Hockney's work, but it looks like they've been inspired by David Hockney. But they've got less life, and swimming pools are surrounded by different things but have no people in them, which makes them less lifelike.
She was particularly taken with mixed media artist Anne-Caroline Bragg.
It was really interesting to see the different ways that Anne-Caroline used stitching and paint in her work, and how she went about creating a piece. And really helped me to experiment with different stitch techniques. And it's really inspired me to look at using textiles in my final piece.
At home, Max watched TV commercials to see the way they were filmed and how that could be applied to his own video.
Looking at the Honda advert, the speed of the advert, the space it involves, the perspective you have of it helps develop your piece and develop your ideas. Also, I'm quite a film buff and like watching a lot of films. I became a fan of Buñuel throughout the process. I learned about different styles such as surrealist films, which Buñuel and Dali worked upon together. I would look at things subconsciously and I would get ideas about close-ups and how effective a tight shot is compared to a distant shot and vice versa. It's definitely a skill to be able to tell a story through images, through moving images, without the narrative, and sometimes it's even more powerful. The photographers I admire are probably Martin Parr and Irving Penn, who use quite close macro shots of different objects, usually everyday objects, especially food.
Nice yellow backdrop. Excuse me, can I just finish off your sandwich?
These mackerel are blushing.
For me, photography is very exciting because people actually pay me to go around the world and look at my own ideas through photography. The reason I do it, I guess, is because for me it's the simplest way of articulating how I feel about the world. Thank you. Thanks.
It could be at the Tuscan Hills here, you see.
Pieces by Sam Taylor Wood. At first it appeared to be as if it was a painting. I think she drew inspiration from some of the Dutch still life painters. A very powerful piece. It's definitely had influence on my work. The way it's lit was influential when working on my piece, trying to light objects which were close up, and also just in itself because it's a video piece, and in itself because she challenges the role of video art.
You can also make links with the ideas, issues and emotions expressed by other artists. Georgie went to look at the installation by Joseph Boys, Lightning with Stag in its Glare.
I think what Boys is trying to do is he's trying to portray the power of nature, as this piece does have mythological background. It's supposed to be a lightning bolt illuminating various different animals. It's very effective as it's rather overpoweringly ugly because of the materials he uses. Looking at other artists' work when I went to the Tate Modern or galleries like that, they kind of broaden your idea of what you think art is. So when I went, I never really thought of everyday objects as being art, but then as soon as after that I saw like rubbish and I saw it as art, and it made me think completely differently about what art was, and so I saw things in such a different way, and it gave me such a better idea of all the possibilities that I could do. Well, these are the sketches that I did from under my bed as I was trying to bring in and incorporate the ideas that I had got from the gallery into my own surroundings. And so I started making initial studies of under the bed, and then to just help develop those ideas, I took some photographs, and then I copied those photographs into sketches. And then I thought it'd be interesting to, instead of using pencil, to do an image of this, but in string. And so for the thicker areas, using this thick rope, and then for the thinner areas, using the string. And then trying to use the shadow and dark areas with the dark string. I think I was greatly influenced by just any artist who had used very everyday, normal objects which they had found.
Sculptor David Mack also uses everyday materials to create his works.
I've used a really wide range of materials in my work. Coat hangers, telephone directories, matches, every shape and size of bottle you can mention. Barbie dolls, Cindy dolls, there is a difference between the two. These are all things from our life. They're not special. Some of the works I've done are a submarine, made with 6,000 car tyres. Big, black, ominous, sleek thing. Those tyres seem to be really appropriate for that image, but it's a representational thing, recognisable thing, made of recognisable things. If you go from that to something like the car park piece at 6 cars normally sitting on the ground, they look as if they're being lifted up. It's not representational in the same way as the submarine. And it's much more abstract in the way that it happens. But again, the cars dictate the forms, so you've got this very definite relationship between these two things.
Primary research is not just about sourcing the works of other artists in galleries. You can actually visit an established living artist. Helen and Rima went to see textile artist Anne-Caroline Bragg. She draws her pictures with the aid of a needle and thread.
So how do you come up with such a big piece? Do you know what you're going to do when you start?
I'm usually inspired by one thing. It could be a newspaper article that really draws my attention, or a person that's been inspiring, and I put that onto the canvas and then it grows from there. So it's like a spontaneous puzzle.
So you combine street art and textiles. How did that come about?
Well, I get inspiration from a lot of different things, so I can't just say it's street art, because I like to be very curious about everything. I like to learn. That's why I paint, I think, because I'm curious, and I listen to different musics, and I read different things, and just trying to be open to lots of different view of things.
Do you feel like there's a connection between all pieces, or do you try to do something different in each one?
The subject matter, I think it's nearly the same, because it's like a philosophizing about life and how things are connected. Material-wise, I like to push myself and be free as possible with the material. I'm trying to combine paint with stitching, the chain stitch, and some cardboard materials, and just be very free with my creation. And
So tell me a bit more about your stitching. Is it, because you don't draw your pictures, is it sort of just replacing the pen? What does it really symbolise?
Yeah, I like the chain stitch because it's like a drawn line and it's quite sharp. And then the spray paint is very soft and flowing, so it's kind of interesting contrast, I think. And then you have all different textures, like the crayon is a bit more muddy, and it's all different feels to it, and it's just a different way of drawing, I suppose. It's a great challenge because both mediums are quite strong, I think, because the paint is a strong way of expressing a line, and the stitching is also a strong line. So I'm just in the middle of trying to marry them too.
So you tend to use mainly hand stitching. Why did you use that compared to machine stitching?
It's a feeling thing for me. I like to feel the material I'm working with, and it's because I don't pre-plan the characters I'm stitching, or it feels more live to me.
So why do you use needle and thread rather than any other medium?
When I went to school when I was a little girl, I was taught how to do stitching and sewing, and I didn't have the patience for it. But then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I saw my mom working at home at Christmas time, and she's really careful, and did this amazing little piece. And I thought, why not use the stitching, but be free with it? Just why don't make it big and bonkers, be.
All this primary research into your own sources of inspiration and your surroundings, as well as into the work, themes, ideas and emotions expressed by other artists, should give you many new ideas for content and techniques you could explore.
After visiting a textile artist, I got really inspired to use textiles in my piece. Although she uses large chain stitching and cross stitching, I felt that I should use a sewing machine as it was more fluent. From this, I tried to use the sewing machine as much as I can, not really drawing them with a pencil, but drawing it more with the machine, using it as my pencil.
Looking at different artist techniques meant that I could use some of their techniques and bring them together with own techniques that I'd learnt already in places such as school or from family and friends. then taking from my own personal ideas and themes and putting them all together meant that I could create a unique piece rather than just copying someone else's.
I think it's very important not to just directly copy artists' work, but it's very important to make it your own and just pick up on ideas that you become interested in and then allow them to influence you to use it for your own means. But also you have to keep into the context of the theme and subject you're given. So you usually do have to change and alter artists' ideas to make it fit into the context.
It just kind of looks like a bed, really.
You can't copy something from the original because, well, it's not. Then you don't feel satisfied with the final product. And good. It may look good and it may appeal to people, but it's not really your own work. And good. Good.
So, primary research means going directly to an original source of inspiration and your surroundings and working from these. It also involves studying the work of other artists and the techniques, themes, issues and emotions they've used. Good primary research is crucial to getting a good mark, so don't forget to keep a record of everything so the examiner can see what you've done. Now let's move on to secondary research. This means not going directly to an original source, but looking at a variety of other outlets, such as the internet and videos, books and magazines, or postcards. Secondary research should build on your primary research and be used to look at the chain of influences from one artist to another. Helen researched the work of other textile and mixed media artists.
Secondary research I used mainly books and postcards from museums and just looked through them all, like reading about the work that they'd done and looking at different techniques and trying to interpret the way that the artists had come across and made those pieces and where they'd come from and the idea and meaning that they had behind them.
My secondary research was really just inspired from being a textile student. I wanted to look at a textile artist in more depth, so I looked at Rachel Howard, and secondary research basically I did that on the internet, and later on I looked at more pictures from her, from books and from pieces that she's actually created. I found it was interesting to do it on the internet because I could find out a lot of information that maybe why she thought of her ideas, and that would help me because I would be able to think of ideas in the same kind of way that she could and maybe come up with something of my own as well.
Rima also watched a video about Rachel Howard and her work.
Indian Embroidery Factory is based on time I spent at an embroidery factory in New Delhi. Throughout that time, I just filled sketchbooks full of mainly the figures and the animals that I came across on my travels. I like drawing people because they're moving figures, and I find that I can draw something moving best because you've got to keep up with it, and you end up with a fast drawing that has a lot of movement and spontaneity about it, and it's purely because you've had to draw it fast because it's a moving thing.
Georgie looked at a selection of postcards in the Tate Gallery shop.
So these are the cards that I picked out from the gallery. These just interested me the most because they were conceptual art, and they kind of inspired me because they weren't really what you usually thought what art was, and they were all just very everyday objects made into art. Most secondary research that I got was from books or the internet, just for extra background information, more detailed maybe analysis of paintings which could help you. And so you can use ideas that you wouldn't necessarily be able to see yourself.
With my secondary research, I got most of it from the internet. Google's a good website to use. You can see videos on the internet, which is quite useful, so you can look up other video artists' work. One of the main things I examined was the differences in editing between film and television, and how maybe film editing is more slow and drawn out, and they tell the story but in different style, whereas television is perhaps pacier, more brisk, and perhaps more fun. And then I also used some postcards, and the library is easy to get a book out, skim through that, and you can often find stuff that's helpful in taking your stuff a bit further, helps you develop your ideas, make them more coherent, and it gives them a good foundation to build upon.
Again, it's important to keep a record of all your secondary research as evidence for your final presentation. But sometimes, despite your best efforts, you hit a blank wall. What can you do to get started again?
The best thing to do is to look at artists who have maybe explored the theme that you are trying to explore at the moment, and have a look at what they have done and try and maybe come up with your own ideas from thinking about their ideas.
When I first started, I completely didn't know what to do because I'd never done this before, looking at artists and comparing their work with mine. So from then I started looking at books, because we have a selection, a good library selection in the art studio of different artists. I started looking at different works through postcards even, to look at what artists had drawn, the sculptures they had done. And it's from that that you think, oh, I quite like what that artist has done over there, maybe I could bring that into my work. Then there's a selection of artists, you probably have several, but then there's always one that you prefer. There's a reason why you prefer their work, and then it's from there that you think, oh, I could incorporate this into mine, and oh, I like what they've done here, maybe I could expand on this.
I've gone to like the Tate Gallery and stuff when I'm really stuck and I want to see what other people have done, and I mean they may not have anything to do with the title, but it'll just get you thinking and get you imagining and stuff, and you think, oh, I really like that idea. I mean, maybe I could do something that's sort of, you know, that gets you enthusiastic about it, and then just sit down and do as many ideas as possible and pick the one that you think is best.
Pick up an art book, go ask an art teacher. I don't think it's really fair if you can just hit a blank wall and say, I'm stuck. I think there's always a route you can take, some way that you can develop your idea.
When I get to a big stop here and I don't know what else to do, I kind of look over my previous work and get ideas from that, and look at different artists' work as well. And also get help from the teacher, because they can tell you their view on your work as well and where you can go from there.
Other things you could try are returning to your original theme and considering some different starting points, such as exploring different media or looking at the work of different artists.
It's often probably better to take a step back from where you were before and maybe doing more initial studies of the things that you were first interested in, and see by maybe doing more studies in greater depth, you could maybe that leads on to a new path.
When I would hit a blank wall, I would normally just sit down again and look at the photographs which I'm using for my work anyway. I would also visit a temple or something, because the patterns that I would use in my work would actually be coming from a temple, so maybe just being back in that train of thought would help me. I would also look back over my work and try to think how I got to my final piece and how I'd want to develop it further. I would always go back and try to find things that I could improve on, and really just things that I would want to change and want to maybe develop into a better piece.
Or you could do a spidergram.
To create a spidergram, I put a main theme or phrase in the middle, and then try and think of all the different things and links towards it and write them all down around it. But when I can't think of any more, I ask different people, and sometimes people can think of different things that you haven't thought of in the first place. So they give you another idea, and then you can expand on their idea, and it might trigger some more ideas off you.
Don't finalise your ideas too early. Play with the theme. Push ideas as far as you can, and use a spidergram to generate random ideas and explore them. To summarise this first assessment objective, it's crucial to explore your chosen theme extensively. Record your observations and thoughts using photos, videos, drawings and notebooks. Do primary research by going to first-hand sources for your inspiration and studying the work of other artists. Build on that with secondary research in books, the internet and postcards. If, despite your best efforts, you hit a blank wall, visit galleries again and reconsider your initial thoughts. This section looks at Assessment Objective 2, which is about analysing and evaluating artefacts, objects and images, and showing an understanding of context. In this section, we'll examine ways of evaluating art and expressing your views about it in appropriate terms. So, how do you evaluate a piece of art?
Like many people, when they first analyse art, it is really if you like it or you don't.
I like to sort of start off looking at what the artist is trying to portray, maybe feelings or emotions, or sometimes a narrative, and then perhaps look at the techniques.
I'm someone who does just kind of see stuff and like it, not necessarily for a reason that I can put down in words, which has made GCSE quite difficult.
Perhaps you look at the size of it, the colour of it, the style that the artist has used, such as textures and...
whether he's used photography, video, painting and why.
But you also look at like what the artist is trying to say and look at the meaning behind it.
So I think it is very important to analyse artwork deeply rather than just taking it for face value.
Some guidelines for evaluating art include first impressions, the content of the work, the context in which the work has been created, and its formal qualities or how the work has been made. The first impressions are your ideas and opinions on experiencing the artwork for the first time. GCSE student Georgie gives her first impressions of The Pack by Joseph Beuys.
Well, my first impressions of this piece is obviously that it's very large, it's very dramatic, it has a very strong presence in the room, and also it's very unusual with its composition and its materials and colours that it's used.
Student Max talks about Sam Taylor Wood's still life.
When I first saw the piece, I loved the way it was lit and the way at first it appeared to be as if it was a painting. And then I also was amazed at the gradual decay and the growth of the decay on the piece, and on the whole I liked it a lot.
And Helen looks at one of David Hockney's water lithographs.
I was originally drawn to this piece because it's David Hockney and it's got a swimming pool in it. And when I first saw it, I was drawn to the different shapes in the water and I wanted to know what they were. And you look into the piece, it's got a lot more deep meaning inside it, and so it really makes you want to question it and see what's going on inside it.
Next, the actual content of the work. This involves looking at the subject matter, how the title of the work helps us understand the meaning or purpose of the artwork, or if there's a narrative to consider.
It's called The Pack because it obviously looks like a pack of huskies should be carrying these sledges. So it creates quite a strange image, seeing sleighs with no huskies.
In terms of content, it's a fruit bowl, basically, and at first the fruit appears rather luscious and strong orange glow, and it's lit beautifully, and then by the end it's still lit beautifully, but the fruit is decomposed. The apple is very important as it's a very powerful religious symbol representing the fall of humanity, the Adam and Eve story, and therefore the decomposition of the apple in the piece could represent fall of humanity.
Subject matter of the piece is swimming pool, and that takes up the main focus of the piece and your eye is instantly drawn to it. It's made of different colours and different blue washes which are linked to the title.
Next, the context in which the work was made. This involves looking at the life and times of the artist and how this knowledge affects your view of the work.
Well, I think this piece was greatly inspired by Beuys through his experiences in the war. When he was in a plane crash and he had an experience where he was badly burnt, and so he used fat and felt to aid the wounds. And the torch and was probably a reminder of the searching for him. The artist's motives in this piece are probably, he seems to be reassessing and rethinking what he thinks life is, and he's reassessing what his life, and this is a reflection of the impact that war has had on him. I think this piece was probably made for himself. It's a way that he could illustrate his ideas and how he was feeling. He'd obviously seen a lot of hardship and degradation and loss of life, and he's just conveying this abandoned scene with an abandoned vehicle.
It's a link to David Hockney's life because he just moved to Los Angeles and he had lots of money and was able to buy a pool, and the grass behind it shows openness and landscape, as well as the water showing his wealth and his love for water.
Marvellous shadow.
This is David Hockney in 1981, talking about his famous Los Angeles swimming pool paintings.
When I first went to Hollywood, about 1964, when I lived in California, I've made lots and lots of drawings and paintings, water. I suddenly realised it's this about something, you know, what's elusive. It's something about the transparent that you can't quite define, especially in words even the colour you can't. And somehow the problem of depicting it becomes a wonderful way of, in your head, thinking of graphic terms and devices to depict it all. Somehow it's a subject that's got a lot of richness there in a way that you can, say, move in and out of. And this, of course, is based on the Japanese, the idea of putting these lines in afterwards. Strange surfaces that you can decide where to look, I find fascinating. You know, in a way, if you look at the floor, your eye stops on the floor. I mean, it is there. With water, you can look at a reflection, then you're looking at the surface, or you can suddenly take the reflection away and look through it.
I took a lot of photographs of a friend swimming underwater. I mean, 50 or 60, all day long. I had him swimming back and forth, back and forth.
Move them out there, move them back over there. And then the shadows underneath. Now they've gone right in the shadow though. Come back over here where the light is. The interesting thing about water is it's something you can't quite define, isn't it? It's unclear, yet clear.
The swimming pool in the piece was situated on top of a very fashionable hotel in Los Angeles. This would be where all the popular and fashionable people would have hung out.
Context is also about the social and political circumstances in which the work was made. How did Boy's The Pack come about?
I used to have this old Volkswagen bus, which I bought very, very cheap. Then one day in 68, 69, this car was really broken and I could not use it anymore. And I told him, boys, I have to give this car away, but I like it so much. It was so helpful all the years for us. Can you do an artwork with it?
And it was The Pack, a strongly autobiographical work, which first brought Boyce to Britain when it was shown at the Edinburgh Festival in 1970. It was part of an exhibition of German artists, Strategy Get Arts, organised by Scottish gallery owner Richard DeMarco.
This is The Pack. And I remember when I first saw it in 1970, it provided me with a terrible headache because how could I get it into the Edinburgh College of Art when the college had a rule about no motor vehicles being inside the college? But we did get it in. Boyce actually helped to bring it in, so we stuck it in a corridor. It scared me then when I saw it, because I knew that this is a warning to us that the age of the motor car might soon be over. And it's from here like a womb giving birth to this pack of creatures.
Because of the pen's presence in the piece, I think it could be telling a story about maybe the effect modern culture has on the world, as in the apple could be a symbol for the world and modern culture imposing itself, and therefore the gradual decay.
Other criteria to consider are the formal qualities of the work. The formal qualities refer to how the artwork has actually been made, the media and the process, such as the materials, tools and techniques used.
Well, 1969 is when this piece was made, which is quite soon after the movement of arte povera, where they used very basic, everyday, rather dull materials. And this seems to be present in his work. All the materials he used seem rather everyday and not materials usually associated with art. And so I think his work has links with that movement.
The piece is set on a screen, but it appears to look like a frame. Sam Taylor-Wood works in video art a lot and definitely challenges the role of video art in art.
This piece is a lithograph. The process used to make this lithograph would be to use a stone and to apply colour to it, and then paper on top. And by layering the colour on top of it, you make up your piece. By using pen, David Hockney's managed to get a really descriptive piece, which means that he can get a really good perspective on the swimming pool and that around it. Also using vivid watercolours means that he can get a really watery feel to the piece.
Other formal qualities are the scale and composition of the work and the sense of space and perspective and how they affect your view of the subject.
This piece is very, very large. It's very hard to miss, and so it has a very strong impact on the viewer and has a very strong presence in the room.
The piece is quite a big piece, and the water in it takes up a large section of the piece, and it's really dominant, showing again David Hockney's love for space.
The composition of this piece is very linear, a very strong sense of line, but also the positioning of the sledges. They're positioned in a way that it creates a very strong sense of movement, so this conveys a sense of nomadic lifestyles.
The piece is beautifully composed, so it allows you to be taken on the journey with the fruit. The piece is quite still compared to other video art. There's not much movement apart from the rotting, everything, which emphasises that is the centre of the piece, that is the pivotal idea. I think she uses a technique called time-lapse. I don't think she edits it.
The dominance of the water shows David Hockney's openness and really brings across the fact that he's happy and content with his freedom. Also the fact that there are no buildings and no plants and trees around shows the landscape is clear and he's hiding nothing and everything is open.
What range of colours has been used? What lines, marks and brushstrokes, and to what effect? What textures and patterns has the artist used, and what lighting and tones? And what overall mood does the artwork capture?
Boyce's mood was obviously very depressed and sombre, as this is greatly reflected in the piece because of the very basic use of materials and the rather dull use of colour and the very poor condition of the vehicle. They all reflect a rather sombre and depressed experiences that he had in the war or post-war Germany.
The colours Sam Taylor-Wood uses in this piece are strong, vibrant colours. It's been lit with quite strong orangey lights which create a very warm feeling.
The piece is very simple, made consistently of three colours, green and white and blue. The blue is dominant and it literally brings you right into the piece and attracts your eye straight away. And then the green shows that it's all natural and landscapey, meaning that he's taking it down to a simple level, making the piece simple.
His use of texture and pattern is very mundane and rather dull almost. And it's also very repetitive, as each sledge is identical. It's placed in quite a repetitive pattern. This almost reflects his idea of the pointlessness and futility of life, which he probably experienced and came to believe through his experiences in the war.
Well, I think the texture of the fruit and the texture of the rock is quite important, as it brings the piece to life more, makes it more real. Also, the shapes in the piece, most of it's rounded, such as the fruit. The fruit is round and the bowl therein is round, which a round object is usually associated with the idea of softness and vibrancy.
The lines and regular patterns in the piece make it very flat and uniform. This then contrasts with obviously the 3D pieces, such as the swimming pool and the diving board. The piece is set outside, which gives it a really light and vibrant feel to it, and makes it look very sunny and inviting. Also, the deep tonal variation within the pool shows a different contrast between the same blue using different tones. It makes a very inviting piece and makes you just want to jump in.
And whenever you do this kind of evaluation of artwork, it's important to keep a record of it. Once you've got your ideas about a work of art together, how do you explain and express your views? When reviewing a work, you should be critical and analytical and not just describe the art. You need to show a first-hand knowledge of the art processes used in the work, and you need to relate your criticism to your own experiences. For help with this, read art criticism or newspaper reviews of art exhibitions. This is part of a review of the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. This year, the Royal Academy's summer exhibition has bravely abandoned its usual blend of familiarity and mediocrity. David Hockney always steals any show he's in by doing the simplest thing, but doing it in his own inimitable way. This year, he's showing 5 full-length, life-size standing male portraits in a glorious palette of greens and blues against white, like some 18th century grand manner portraitist. It is profoundly unoriginal of me, I know, but these were the pictures I liked best. Notice how this review talks about content, 5 full-length portraits, formal qualities, a glorious palette of greens and blues against white, first impressions, these were the pictures I liked best. And it compares the work with that of other artists, like some 18th century grand manner portraitist. So this is Georgie's final review of Joseph Beuys' The Pack.
Well, I think that Beuys was a very unique artist. He seemed to have very strong ideas of his own, but I think he probably had very strong subliminal influences, probably from the Arte Povera movement, which was in the 1950s, slightly before he started doing his pieces. And also from artists such as Marcel Duchamp, who were the first artists to start using everyday materials and objects. So he's a very 20th century artist in that sense. They're exploring new ways and pushing the boundaries of art. But unlike these people, Beuys personalised his art, so in that sense he is unique and different.
In a way, I think I pushed my own boundaries of what I thought was art, as previously I'd always used very conventional methods such as painting and things like that.
So when you evaluate art, you should use your first impressions of the work and analysis of the content, context and formal qualities of the work itself. When expressing your views, you should be critical and analytical, using the language of art, and show knowledge of the art processes used. You should also relate your criticism to your own experience. You can best improve your skills as an art critic by reading art books and reviews of exhibitions. In this section, we're going to look at Assessment Objective 3 about developing and exploring ideas. To develop and explore your ideas, you should use different media and constantly review and refine your work as it progresses, always looking to use a range of processes and techniques. Experimentation is the basis of creating your own work of art. GCSE student Georgie is working on the theme Overhead and Underneath, based on imagery from above and below her bed. Here, she's raiding the rubbish dump for materials for her work.
Most of the materials that I used I had found either in the house or in scrap heaps and metal yards for the metal that I used, because I didn't want to use any new metal, so I couldn't buy it from shops or anything like that. So going to scrap heaps and things like that seemed the most obvious way of finding it, because they were rusting and old, which was the effect that I wanted to achieve.
Rima is also working on the theme Overhead and Underneath, based on different generations of her family and inspired by textile patterns.
Can I get this one, please? Throughout my work, I'm hoping to use textiles. I may do this by recreating the photographs which I've taken of my family. I hope to achieve a kind of a layer effect. As my theme is actually generations for overhead and underneath, generations meaning the people above me and the people below me, which will also be created throughout the textiles.
Max is working on the theme Everyday Objects and is making a video about getting up in the morning.
Well, I had a handheld camera. It wasn't very state-of-the-art, and I also recorded onto mini DV tapes. Scoop some from the clean bit, yeah? Then I would transfer using, I think it's Firewire, transfer the material onto the computer. And then I taught myself how to edit stuff, how to make it more quick and pacey, and how to change the speed of clips, and how to add sound, and how to enhance the sound you've already got off your camera, and dissolves and transitions and stuff like that, which was very helpful in producing a final piece.
Helen is also working on Overhead and Underneath, based on her enthusiasm for swimming and images of water.
So a lot of my preparatory work was done in different medias, and I like to explore different medias and different ways of creating a piece. And for one of my final pieces in my book, I decided to do a major mixed media piece and took a photo and then used different medias to build up different places, such as water I did in acrylic, sky I did in watercolour, and build it up like that, and then see the different techniques and the ways that they use to make the best effect, and then looked at the way that I used them and improved that.
As you grow more confident, you can push the boundaries and break the rules. It's important to learn from your experiments, so keep evidence and make notes of everything you do, whether it worked or not.
When I was experimenting with techniques, I stuck them all into my book and then wrote about the positive points and the negative points, and wrote about how I came across a technique and how I did it and got to that stage, and then worked out how I would use it in the final piece.
Continue to make links with the work of other artists, examining the methods they've used, particularly if they're out of the ordinary. Video artist Bill Viola uses old masters as the basis for his work.
It's the first time the video screen has overtaken the canvas in these rooms of the National Gallery, and the first time moving images have been hung on the walls alongside the National's monumental paintings. Plus, their creator is still around.
One of the main things for me that I'm so happy about being here is that I'm alive, and most of my colleagues upstairs are dead.
The 14 works reveal human expression from the introspective to the wildly dramatic. And refer in part to the masterpieces hanging in the National Gallery.
Well, this picture actually was a direct inspiration for one of Bill's works. It's a painting by Bosch, painted at the end of the 16th century, showing Christ surrounded by these threatening tormentors with their metal fists. And it was actually the inspiration for a work that Bill produced in 2000, which was the Quintet of the Astonished.
Gradually over the years, I began to see that there's in fact a deep connection to this older work of the past, particularly the Renaissance artists, who were technological innovators like myself, and the art of the present.
And in case you're wondering, these aren't home videos. The artist has used actors throughout.
This work also provided inspiration for our GCSE student Max.
Breaking the constraints of art and dabbling in a video medium which challenges the concept of where the line can be drawn, where what is art.
I feel I link with artists from the past on my own culture and tradition by using the same Islamic floral patterns that are used on tiles. Although Islam does not permit work to have figures in it, I've been bringing in my own personal pictures of my family and photographs, which I will be using later on. Also, being a Sikh, Islam is very different to Sikhism, but I still feel that it's all Asian, and so it all fits together perfectly.
Photographer Faisal Abduallah also has his own interpretation of traditional imagery.
I often go into galleries when I'm creating a new piece of work and I need some sort of inspiration to help me with the idea. Sometimes I go to like the National Gallery, which like houses paintings from like 13th up until like 20th century, and I think they're wonderful paintings. But being black, the images are not reflective of my experience. And the few black faces that you see, they are either in subservient positions, serving food to the so-called white master in the picture, or they are being sort of decapitated or being mutilated or being stabbed. And I just find that a bit strange. The period of painting that I like is the Renaissance paintings. Most of the paintings deal with a religious theme. I think we should all be aware of the power of visual imagery. I was raised in a Christian background. My dad had images on the wall, like this sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Christ. And as I got a lot older, I began to question the whole racial origin of Christ. I found descriptions of Christ in the Bible which suggested that he looked more like me, as opposed to the images that I'd been exposed to as a child. And those quotes were saying his skin was like burnt brass and his hair was like lamb's wool. And it's from that point on I began to use Christ as like the central figure in kind of like expressing my ideas about history and how we should question history. I like this Bellini painting because it's a very beautiful painting. The way in which he has used colour, line, shape and form. The perspective of it is quite nice as well. When Bellini painted it 500 years ago, he painted the model wearing the clothes of his time and in his own landscape. What I intend to do is to recreate the Madonna in the meadow, but place my model in an urban landscape and have a black person in the picture. With these series of photographs, the idea I have replaced the traditional Madonna and Child with, to me, another Madonna and Child.
The Arte Povera, poor art movement in the 1950s experimented with the innovative use of everyday materials. Alighiero Boetti created bundles of wooden sticks with the aim of making ordinary things attractive. Lucio Fontana made slices through the canvas. Alberto Buri worked with layers of sacking. This was an inspiration for our GCSE student, Georgie.
When I was looking at Alberto Buri's work, I noticed that he used a lot of sacking material, which I thought looked really effective and visually quite interesting. And so I wanted to use that in my piece, my final piece. And so I saw that it was quite similar to webbing, which is underneath beds and underneath chairs. And so that gave me the idea of using materials that can be associated with being under the bed.
Well, Raphael took cartoons that were painted and then put them into tapestries, and in the same way I took a photo and put it into a appliqué piece. So it was really interesting to see the different methods that could be used to take a picture or a photo and put it into textiles.
Helen also looked at the textile-based work of Anne-Caroline Bragg.
It was really interesting to see the different ways that Anne-Caroline used stitching and paint in her work, and really helped me to experiment with different stitch techniques and paints and colours used in my work.
But whatever your influences, you mustn't directly copy the work of other artists, but take their ideas further, making sure they're relevant to your chosen theme. Try different combinations of ideas, techniques and materials.
Throughout my sketchbook, I've demonstrated different techniques from other artists by recreating their work. Instead of recreating their work exactly the same, I try to differ the colours, the textures and the fabrics that I use. This helps to make my work a bit more unique and help discover my own technique, which I could use theirs for.
There are different ways that David Hockney uses shape and tone and colour to build up a water piece. For example, sometimes he uses different lines with the same blue running all the way through, and other times he uses different random water shapes with different colours to build up one full surface.
For instance, the earlier ones are done with very, very stylised form in the water. Rather jigsaw shapes with a heavy blue line describing the interlocking shapes, as though somebody's jumped in the pool and it's dancing around, all the shapes are dancing. Other one, the painting called The Sunbather, has the dancing lines on the pool. The dancing line is yellow, which happens if you look into a swimming pool and it's very sunny, and you get this dancing yellow line all the time. Later on, I could make the water look very fluid and wet by putting paint on, acrylic paint that was very, very diluted, and you put a detergent in it, so when you paint on the canvas soaks it up like blotting paper.
So this was just a collage that I did. I was using the initial idea of the springs. I was trying to create spring-like shapes with just very boring everyday materials. Well, this was me just doing my own interpretation of the Arte Povera movement using their very basic materials. A milk bottle handle with twisting wire around it. This is just plastic, which is actually cut from a milk bottle, and rope, which I got the idea from Ava Hess. And I became more aware of the very strong metallic elements in the work, and so I started incorporating the metal into my work by doing these collages. And I did a few experiments of mixing them together. That's a very simple one, just of the metallic springs, and then with the Hessian, which is almost this bedding coming through. So it's almost as if the springs are bursting through the Hessian from the top. I finally decided to make a sculpture using a box. I was influenced by Joseph Cornell, who did a lot of box works where he made boxes and with all his collections and collected items inside. And also it just seemed to make sense as it allowed me to be able to make shadows and hang things from the ceiling and have sides, and it created a quite claustrophobic atmosphere, which was what I wanted to create, and so a box seemed the most obvious way of displaying my ideas.
Artists have always experimented with materials and techniques. These works are by Rebecca Horn.
accompagna un desdichado amor.
You know, these sculptures are not perfect. They are not like washing machines or something like this. They are humbled, they shake, they get nervous, they fall down. That's a human quality they have. They're sometimes very anxious and tremble and hesitate, and all these kind of uncontrolled sometimes movements makes them more human.
Scrapheap Services helped me to get off the dole. It was a fictitious cleaning company that got rid of people who no longer played a useful role in life. I used to go late at night to a McDonald's and reverse the car on the back of McDonald's and just go through all their rubbish and get all the rubbish in the back of the car and then leave it outside Peckham. And then the next morning, it was because it was quite a hot summer, there'd be all these soldier ants in there and stuff, so we had this whole ecosystem going in the back of the car. And basically I used to just kind of cut all the rubbish out and then make these little stamped figures out of rubbish.
How long did you spend collecting rubbish?
3 years. 3 years of my life.
This work is by conceptual clothing artist Jenny Dutton.
The range of materials I use is really varied. Snakeskin, butterfly wings, wire, tree bark, dress netting, broken glass. I've even made shoes out of old love letters. Clothes are like your second skin, covering you and protecting you. I've been using a lot of materials that are skins in nature. I think the mackerel skin corset is one of the most unusual materials I've been using. I like the idea of using fish skins because that's a sort of symbol of female form.
These giant images are by Fiona Ray, who uses computers in her work.
This is my studio. And these are some paintings that I've been working on for a new exhibition in London this autumn. The computer's a really useful tool for me. This image is a starting point for the pink painting. I started off with this pink ground and put all these letters on it. And I can move them around and make different compositions until I come up with something that I like. I can also then flip the colours over of the background by selecting the background and thinking, wow, quite like that. I can just whiz it around, flip the colour over, red to green, blue to black, whatever. Really, I can come up with scores of different possibilities.
Max found computers particularly useful for his video project.
I find it satisfying to work with computers because I don't know how else you edit a film. But it can get quite frustrating, especially when you lose clips or you misplace files and something doesn't work and sound doesn't work. But on the whole, it usually creates quite pleasing effects.
Wake me up before you open eyes.
Whatever media you use, don't be afraid to change direction, to take a second look, to try a different route. Clothing artist Jenny Dutton again.
I used to make suspended human figures made out of wire and paper. The wrappings around these figures became more interesting to me than the actual human forms. I got rid of the human form and just concentrated on the wrappings, and it seemed quite obvious then to make clothes, conceptual clothing. An empty dress symbolises the fact that there was a figure once there and it's gone. And you're left with this beautiful shape.
So my first main blank wall was when I got to the second week and realised that my first theme, the heavens, wasn't going to carry on through the full 6 weeks into my final piece. So I went back to the very beginning again, reread through the whole booklet that we were given at the start of the project, and looked through my work and looked at my life and basically just thought of things that would give me motivation and inspiration to carry on with a different theme.
I started with the idea of just zips, but it was a bit boring, so I wanted to have an idea or a story behind it, so I decided to depict the chaos of waking up in the morning.
But whatever you do, make sure you stay within your capabilities.
Kind of like the embodied idea of like having the skin over the flesh and over the bones and muscles and everything, and I thought that would be quite interesting in different medias and different colours and everything. Although I didn't feel that was really what I was used to doing, and I felt that I would be more comfortable in experimenting in a range that I would actually be comfortable in working with, and patterns and generations and different kind of just a more creative kind of side of it was all linking into one subheading, and so I decided to develop that.
As you go along, remember to review and refine your work, like artist Karen Howes.
I put together all the pieces as I go along, so I'll link the fabric sketches with other elements like stones or shells, and often I'll live with it for a while and it might get rearranged or cut up. I see it as an important process to go through. I'm looking for a balance. The formal elements of colour and tone and texture come into it. I like there to be a reason why certain images are put together. With the Bassini piece, the contrast between the white of the surf and the blue of the sea seems quite important. And moving down the piece, you've got the view from the cliff top, looking down on the water, and then as you go down the path to the sea, you come to the stone archway and the waterfall down below. So there's that feeling of travelling down into the cove that I'm trying to get across. With this piece of work, I'm trying to achieve the atmosphere of the place rather than a direct representation or landscape picture. I'm trying to get the feeling of Bassini across. It's a very personal response to that particular landscape.
To review my work, each week we had to write a diary, and to write that diary I went back each week to look over my work and to see the good pieces and the bad pieces and the inspiration that I gained from it, and to see how I could then move those pieces into the next week's pieces and then into my final design.
So, in developing and exploring ideas, use different media and don't be afraid to change direction. Don't directly copy the work of other artists, but take their ideas further. Experiment with different techniques and materials, and review and refine your work as you go. Make sure you keep notes of all the things you try. And check that what you're doing is still relevant to your chosen theme. Now for Assessment Objective 4, which is about presenting your work and connecting it with that of other artists. It's about bringing all your work together in a final piece. You need to show good sketchbooks and journals that show your responses to your theme and illustrate how your work meets the 4 assessment objectives. You must show how you've made observations and experimented, and then developed and refined your work to create your final piece. You must also connect what you've done with the work of other artists. First, sketchbooks and journals. GCSE students talk about how important sketchbooks and journals are.
I think presentation in the sketchbook is very important because it allows the examiner to see better what you're trying to portray to them. If you've got a poor presentation, then it can result in impeding what you're trying to show in your book.
In your final folder of work and in your diary work, show the steps you've taken from beginning to end and how you've developed your final piece from the original ideas that you had.
Sketchbooks are the things that you show first. They're the main starter of your final piece, and you at least need to make 2 to 3 sketchbooks, and in those you need to show different ways that you've developed your work and different media tests.
Also, you need to include many artist studies. 2 would be the minimum, just to show how they have related to your work. And this will help you in kind of developing your sketchbook and showing the examiner that you have developed your ideas throughout the sketchbook.
And build up this sketchbook of all these from direct observation drawings that you've enjoyed doing, and then I wouldn't so much keep a diary, but I would look at artists who perhaps could inspire you to do these drawings as well, and look at how they've done drawings from direct observation as well.
GCSE student Helen's theme was overhead and underneath, based on her interest in swimming and the work of David Hockney.
All the annotations and notework were done in proper pen or typed. This meant that it was legible for everyone to read. It's important when annotating sketchbooks and the work that you've done as preparatory work that you make sure that you're always to the point, and that you just don't state all the visual points, but you go more into depth and things that you won't be able to see on the page. Sometimes it's tempting to copy blocks of writing that you might see in a review or in a book, but it's really important that you link all your work to yourself and then bring it across in your own way and say what you thought personally was good about it and how it linked to your theme.
Rima's theme was also overhead and underneath, about different generations of her family, using Islamic and other patterns. These are some of her journals.
Tones, techniques, medias, colours were all described in the writings, and it varied from simple notes to artistic words being used just to really emphasise on the point and the image that we're going for.
And this is Rima's final work, a mixed media textile piece.
To evaluate the different media's processes and techniques that I'd used in my book, I went back and evaluated them along with the piece, stated whether they were effective and non-effective, and spoke about how I came across them, why I used them, and how they would help me in my final piece.
The theme of Georgie's project was also overhead and underneath, based on images above and below her bed and using everyday materials.
Well, during this theme, I kept a diary of all my ideas I put onto paper in a book, and I made sketches in this and wrote down any names of artists that I used. And so this meant that if you ever did find yourself stuck and you weren't going anywhere, you could always go back to initial ideas that you had and then lead on from there in a different direction. And it's quite useful to look at how you have developed your ideas and how your journey has changed.
And this is Georgie's final piece, a 3-dimensional box containing elements from above and below her bed, constructed from rough, everyday materials.
We did primary and secondary observations, which were then put into our sketchbook, and then you had to analyse them in short paragraphs. To make sure that you didn't put everything down into the short paragraphs, they had to be cut down and made sure that you were using artistic words and getting to the point. So to develop our idea, every week or so, we had to put in a final idea and where we were at the moment and write about it and analyse it and say the different techniques that we were still planning on using. And during the weeks, as we built up, you refined and redid your work to come up with your final piece at the end.
And this is Helen's final piece, an underwater view of her swimming overhead using tie-dye effects and applique material. Max was making a video on the theme of everyday objects to capture the rush to get up in the morning. His journals include a storyboard.
A storyboard is a kind of sketchbook because it's showing a journey from the starting point to the end. And within my storyboard, I drew out little pictures and tried to discuss how I was going to shoot those and in what fashion, in what style.
And this is part of Max's final work.
It's been called compound culture.
However you choose to present your work, you should connect it with the work of other artists, including those who inspired you, explaining how.
My work linked with David Hockney's work, and we both had hints of fine art in our work, mine less than his. We both used symbols of the swimming, same subject matter, and style. We both used similar tone, shape and colour. For example, using David Hockney's water technique, but then using my own tie-dye and use of fabric rather than his painting meant that I'd created a new piece. I did copies of David Hockney's work, and I found it really hard to recreate his work, just for the fact that he's very detailed, and it took me a lot longer to create a piece that was already created by someone else, because you had to get it perfect, rather than going about creating your own piece where you can put in your own ideas and it comes straight out of your head.
The first artist that I was influenced by was Eva Hess, a German artist in the 1950s, and she was part of the Arte Bavaria group, and she was the artist who started me translating and transforming sketches into reliefs and 3D work. And as a collage, I wanted to use the Hessian material with a string and rope kind of acting as if the springs, and then the spring coming through the Hessian, maybe some feathers and some dirt. And then from knowing about the Arte Bavaria movement and studying that in more detail, I looked at the work of Joseph Beuys and Alberto Buri and how it was personal to them. And then I combined all the ideas to make it my own.
You can draw inspiration from anything. Inspiration from doing an everyday thing can be turned into something interesting if you use a different angle or look at it in a different way. So it's impossible to say what you draw from subliminally.
So to summarise, you need to show good sketchbooks and journals detailing your responses to the chosen theme, and relevant observations, experiments, developments and refinements towards your final piece. You must connect your work to that of other artists to show the influence they've had on your work. Above all, be sure that you show how your work meets the 4 assessment objectives. Now we come to the final exam. Your final art and design exam makes up 40% of your marks. You'll be given the exam paper between 4 and 8 weeks before the day of the exam, depending on the exam board, with the themes you'll be working on. You've then got some preparation time before the exam and a supervised 10-hour session to complete and present your work. Your work is assessed by your teacher using the 4 assessment objectives and checked by the exam board.
For the exam day itself, I think you've just got to remember all what you've been taught, all what you've learnt. Look at your sketches, use them well, and also just relax, I think, is the main thing.
If you pace yourself well and you've got enough sources with you to work from, then it's absolutely fine.
Give yourself enough time for each week for your homework and make sure you put effort into it right from the beginning. Don't just leave it to the last minute, because you'll always find that your work was slightly not as good quality as you were hoping.
As you approach the exam, you should think about interpreting your chosen theme, using the preparation time, planning for the exam, presenting your work, and assessing what you've done. First, some advice about interpreting the themes set by the exam board. Art and design is open to personal interpretation. There's no right or wrong answer. This means that the same theme can have many different responses and be presented in many different ways, and your ideas can be as good as anyone else's. This exhibition of student work shows what a varied range they can produce. Take, for example, the theme Safely Contained.
At the time, a lot of newspaper articles were going on about Iraq War and a lot of violence and stuff and during the news. It wasn't all about that, but I mean, I wanted to come across as a sort of an ironic take on Safely Contained, because this isn't safely contained.
My intention was to convey the message of drugs and how they're safely contained in the world today through using the style of Damien Hirst and taking the words of the food cans and changing them into labels from drugs packets. And by doing this, I was explaining that food is obviously easily accessible, and so drugs aren't safely contained in the world because they're almost as easily accessible as food is. I think I personalised the theme by creating a final piece that is original and is something that when people see it, it sort of attracts attention, because it's not like something that you just normally see in an art studio or in a gallery, because it is a shopping basket. But then when you look at it closer, you can realise that there is actually a message conveyed in the piece.
Now we'll look at how best to use those weeks of preparation time that lead up to the exam. Start your preparation time by reading the exam paper carefully. Some exam boards give you one theme, others offer a choice, but they all offer suggestions about how you might interpret them. Discuss with your teacher the themes and how you might tackle them. It's also a good idea to start straight away by writing down some initial thoughts.
Don't panic about what you need to do, because it will happen, and in that exam things will work how you want them to. If you've done the preparation work, then it should all go to plan.
In actual fact, you've only got a few days really. If you think about it, it's the weekends really, the nights, and on top of that you have other homework too. So I think it's a balance of time, and you have to work so much for this.
In the early stages, look for sources of inspiration in galleries or in secondary sources such as postcards, books, on the internet, or best of all, from objects around you. Don't forget to make notes and sketches as you go. Keep referring to the theme in the exam paper and think about relevant artists. And keep an eye on those assessment objectives. As you get a third of the way through your preparation time, return to your chosen theme and explore it further and build up your initial thoughts. You can also begin to experiment with different media.
I had several ideas at the beginning, and then I cut them off one by one as I was getting down to the main piece. And so basically I started off with lots of ideas and lots of branches and lots of new things to think about, and halfway through
I might think, oh, I don't really like this idea, I'll go back a couple of steps to where I had that idea and follow that through and see if that gives me anything. I mean, that's how I kept things fresh at that time, because you start off with lots of ideas and then cut them down.
Then you should start to visualise your ideas and develop them in different ways. And keep making notes, sketching and experimenting with small-scale thoughts.
You pick up ideas as you go along, and drawing is a way to get ideas and think about how you're going to get the ideas of other people and put them into your own work.
As you go past the halfway point in your preparation, your ideas should be taking shape, so it's time to review your work so far and consider what's required to improve it.
On my first canvases of paintings, I made mistakes of colours and composition. I didn't plan it out very well, but then when I did this canvas, I decided to plan it out. I took a few photographs and I eventually worked out they would be better if I worked from a mirror, and I did it all from a mirror and tried to get the tones and values as close as possible, and I made several composition studies to try and get this one.
In the final weeks, finish your preparation and finalise your composition so you know what's going to be involved in creating your final piece. Think about the most appropriate materials and techniques to use. If you have more than one good idea, keep a few on the go and decide on your favourite nearer the time. The next stage is to start planning for the exam itself.
The night before my exam, you have to have a little picture of what you want to do, because before, you can't just come the day before and say you want to do this, this, this. You have to have an idea and tell your teacher what you want to do so they can help you as well. When you come in, you just lay out your work and just be calm and do what you have to do.
I knew roughly what I was going to do when I went in, and then I just paced myself. I thought, okay, I should get to this stage by this hour, and I timed myself, made sure that I'd worked things out.
I think that planning your time to make sure you have time to do all the artwork required to help you get the highest grade possible, and to put your best effort into it and just to enjoy it.
Once you know what you're going to do in the exam session, make a rough timetable, thinking through each process and how long it will take, particularly if you need something to dry before you can continue.
I think sometimes you work better under pressure, and perhaps in this case you do, because you know that you have to get it done, and if you go in knowing what you want to do and what you want to get out of it, then you know what needs to be done, and the 10 hours, it is a long time.
Work out exactly what materials and equipment you'll need, and check with your teacher that the things you want will be available in the exam room on the day.
Don't plan the night before and realise that you need 8 litres of white paint and you're not going to get it. Make sure your teacher knows how big you're working. Make sure that you've got a space assigned in your art room. Also, the best thing to do is to get a shoebox, put your name on it, put all your paints in it, bring brushes. If you've painted all the way through your sketchbook with a certain type of brush, you get into your exam and you plan to use the brushes in your art room and they're not the same, then you're not going to get the same product.
It's vital to take all your preparatory sketches and journals into the exam, as they're an important part of your work and will be assessed together with your final piece. Don't attempt something you haven't tried before, such as working in a new material or using a new technique. It's far too risky. But don't over-prepare. Leave a few things to chance, because it keeps your ideas fresh.
The best thing to do is to leave the night before to do nothing. Don't do anything the night before your exam except for get your materials ready, keep everything together, put your sketchbook together, maybe do the front page of your sketchbook and then leave it. Because if you start worrying about what you're going to do in the exam the next day, you get in and you completely forget everything, you freak out and you can't do anything in your exam.
You should sort of leave something that you're not quite sure about, like where you're going to paint something exactly, and what kind of colours you might use. I mean, you could experiment during the exam, but just to keep it kind of fresh. Don't do exactly the same picture over and over and over again, or otherwise you'll get bored with it.
Finally, check that all your ideas and the preparatory work you're presenting is relevant to the theme you've chosen to work on.
To maximise your marks from your final piece, I'd say you have to try to include as much of your development work as you can in your final piece, but also to make sure that your development work was relevant to the final piece and that you haven't included any random aspects which haven't previously been researched.
Presenting your final work for exhibition or in a folder for the examiner is very important. Make your work look as professional as possible. Your teacher can give you advice about this during your course, but not during the final exam. Annotate all your preparatory work and supporting studies and make sure you've met all the assessment objectives. No one can assess what isn't there or if its relevance isn't clear. The same applies to your coursework units, which must also be properly presented. So let's see how our 4 GCSE students fared in presenting their final pieces. GCSE student Helen's work was on the theme Overhead and Underneath, based on her interest in swimming and the work of David Hockney.
To present my final piece, we had an art exhibition at school. I stretched out my piece onto a double board and stapled it in the middle amongst my different pieces of artwork. A lot of textile technique is used hand sewing, but I tried to use all machine sewing in my work, which meant that I was using different techniques, but still coming out with a similar effect. So a lot of my preparatory work was done in different medias, and I like to explore different medias and different ways of creating a piece. When I was experimenting with techniques, I stuck them all into my book and then wrote about the positive points and the negative points and wrote about how I came across the technique and how I did it and got to that stage, and then worked out how I would use it in the final piece.
Georgie's theme was also Overhead and Underneath, based on above and below her bed.
I never expected to do a sculpture for my final piece. I always expected that I'd do a painting or a collage or a relief. But as I started studying Arte Povera and their use of very everyday, mundane objects, I became very interested in that, and I started developing ideas from sketches to reliefs and then finally to sculptures. Looking back at my final piece, I can see that I used a variety of different techniques, such as painting, gluing, I used a staple gun. And all these techniques were developed by experimentation during the development work. And so it was very useful in making those experiments so that in the final piece I could use all the techniques that I had improved on. Well, during this theme, I kept a diary of all my ideas I put onto paper in a book, and I made sketches in this and wrote down any names of artists that I used. It's quite useful to look at how you have developed your ideas and how your journey has changed.
Rima's theme was Overhead and Underneath as well, based on different generations of her family.
Initially, the techniques that I used were fabric paints, silk painting, and really just adding to a fabric. But then I felt that a mixture of glass and fabric would combine a kind of soft and hard feel to my work, a different media which would help with my work.
And this is some of Rima's supporting material. Max's theme was everyday objects, and he made a video about getting up in the morning.
Okay.
Within my storyboard, I drew out little pictures and tried to discuss how I was going to shoot those and in what fashion, in what style.
Before you hand your work in, you need to assess what you've done, maybe making a personal statement about the processes you went through. This could cover your organisation, observation, research and experimentation, including what went well and what didn't, and what you would do differently and why. You could explain how resolved your ideas are, how they developed during your preparatory work and how they relate to your final piece. Explain how well made you think your piece is and how your work connects with that of other artists. And don't forget to refer to the 4 assessment objectives.
Over time, my piece developed, changed.
A personal statement doesn't have to be written. It can take the form of an audio or videotape.
The initial ideas we were given was the idea of cogs, buttons, zips, switches, bulbs, experimentation that led to the final piece.
So what are the examiners looking for when they assess your work?
The examiners really want to see your individual interpretation of the theme, and that means you have to find the objects that reflect the theme that you are interested in.
What the examiner wants to see, and to get the highest marks at GCSE, they want to see a fluent candidate. A fluent candidate is able to try out different ideas, reject different ideas, and actually write down why they've rejected things and why they're actually going on to a new process, a new technique.
Sometimes people produce wonderful work and they don't have the supporting evidence to back up what they've done. So if you meet all the assessment objectives and produce a good piece of work, you can be sure that you'll be doing well.
It's really important to meet all of those assessment objectives. So the ones about realising ideas, experimenting with media, making connections with the work of other artists, looking at cultures, all of those are equally weighted in the final mark sheet.
So to summarise, the final GCSE Art and Design exam counts for 40% of your final mark, and your work is assessed by your teacher and checked by the exam board. You have several weeks of preparation time before the exam, and you should plan carefully for the 10-hour exam session itself. It's vital to present your work professionally, and a personal statement can summarise everything you've done and why. That's the end of this Bitesize programme about art and design. There's more information in the GCSE Bitesize book and on the Bitesize website at bbc.co.uk/revision.